Hi, everyone. Here on LitBlock, we have my friend and incredible educator and human, Liz Pappas. And Liz is here to talk to us today. Just a really timely conversation around what learners need now. And we are continuing to be part of an educational environment that just is ever changing, not just in terms of our practices, of course, but just trying to navigate a lot of hard stuff that's going on. And we thought it was important that we took some time just to think about, really boil it down to what do learners need now. And the reason that Liz is the perfect person to have this conversation with is because she has both experience and knowledge, and then on the other side of that, real compassion and heart. So just by way of introduction, if you haven't heard Liz before, she's just a human-centered educator and is also a professor at UCSD, working with pre-service teachers who just sing your praises, not just for all that you know, but all that you help them learn about themselves. And also on top of that, you're an educational consultant. So you work with different schools in so many areas. And I want to say primarily infused into everything that you do is this social justice advocacy. And that can be branched out into many different areas, but that is one of those things that is just in the fabric of you, and therefore the fabric of all things that you do with education. And so thank you, Liz, for being here with us to talk about what learners need now.
Thanks, Patty. Thank you so much. I really love this topic of what learners need now. And I think all of us humans need to follow one single deep breath often during our days. And so I start that way too, just like a big,
yeah.
And I think we need to create more space in our learning spaces too. So I came up with this idea that I'd love to share. And I came up with this idea that I'm hoping that we can create a classroom as an oasis, where a classroom has a sense of relief, refuge, safety, sustenance. Like imagine, the oasis, that you can imagine an oasis and people are finding relief and getting what they need and then moving on. So I propose that we build this classroom oasis with an approach that I came up with, and I call it the C.A.R.E approach. And here it is. You taught me to do the little Post-its. My C stands for compassion, and what's invisible there is that compassion leads to connection. The A stands for agency, and we'll dig into agency. I'm really drawing on Peter Johnston's work as my inspiration on agency. Promoting a space where there's relevance, where we realize how useful knowledge is and that it's worth knowing and it's interesting and kids are leaning in, is critical right now.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of it all, at the foundation of it all, is equity. And we'll dig into some distinctions around understanding and creating learning spaces that are equitable. So I think that's what I have to offer. And I was going to jump right into compassion, unless you had something that you wanted to say.
I just want to say that I appreciate the acronym, because a lot of times these big concepts and the being able to bring all of this to the classroom can feel really ambiguous. But when we have something like an acronym and each word stands for something that we're going to dig into, or each letter stands for something that we're going to dig more into, it gives us a place to like hang our hat, so to speak. Like it's a place that we can always come back to. Are these four things? Have I really built a C.A.R.E space here, a C.A.R.E classroom? So thank you for organizing it in a way that can feel really concrete to us as we build these classroom spaces. So I'd love to hear about that first C, compassion.
Compassion. So, you know, we all probably have some differing definitions of compassion. I'm really wrapping words around understanding people's different emotional states. So it's that sense of there's a sensitivity to maybe the suffering that people are experiencing, and even with yourself too. So we can define it in a self-compassion and compassion for others. But I'm seeing compassion as a catalyst for building trust in a classroom. And with so much time, we're continuing to work and live in the way you launched our whole time together in a space where we have a global pandemic still. Some of us are extraordinarily sensitive and worried about climate change and human rights violations and political divisiveness and bias and prejudice and mental health crises and. And I feel like every time I walk out into a campus, I'm realizing that that's pulsating around all of us. So these issues affect our health, our well-being as us educators, as well as our students, as well as our families. I know for me lately, I've been really I've had lots of moments where I'm feeling heavy-hearted, murky, flabbergasted, stuck, drained. And then I do have those moments of joy and connection and inspiration. But because of this current reality, we need this sense of compassion for ourselves more now than ever, and to extend compassion to our students, every child, every day, and their families.
Yes.
So I wanted to offer a few ideas to try.
Great.
And if some of these ideas are ideas that are familiar, then validation is an amazing form of professional learning. And when you're in these swirling contexts that we are living in, they remind us what to hold on to. So, you know, one of the ideas to try is to continue to plan your daily community building, and not just a quick check-in, but really focusing more on emotional granularity, where kids are learning to notice and name a variety of emotions and be able to hold them all in that same space. So when you say, how are you? Let's not even accept a one-word answer. Let's have, I feel blank, 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 and maybe even another blank. I was full of words about how I was feeling, just to promote this common humanity and juxtapose that full range of emotions. Another idea that we can immediately do is to listen well, and listen with intention, with full body, to really absorb words, to notice the silence, to pay attention to our learners' gestures, and to teach them to do the same. So slowing things down a notch, I think, will take some of that pulsating energy that we're feeling out in the schools, where it does feel intense. I'm out at schools every week, where we can create a little bit more space to listen well. We'll be able to build our compassion better. And I've said this before on LitBlock, and I stand by it. Ask your teachers what they wish, ask your learners what they wish that you knew about them, so they can finish that prompt, I wish my teacher knew. And when you ask that type of a prompt, you know, be ready for a wide range of responses. And you might need to process with an educator. And I just went to dinner with a friend the other day, and we were processing all the I wish my teacher knew things. It works for every age. And then you can also share what you wish your students knew about you, to start with some vulnerability. So compassion, first C in this approach of what learners need now.
Yeah. And a lot of times as educators, we're thinking about jumping right into the content. And it's just absolutely massively challenging for kids to be able to learn content without feeling acceptance, feeling affirmed, feeling included in a classroom community. And building in a little bit of time, often, where we get to build in and nurture and evolve our compassion over time through those check-ins and down to the granular level, truly listening, and then asking that question, you know, what is it that you want your teacher? What do you want me to know? What is it you wish I knew? All right, so that's like that's important and concrete at the same time, just exactly what you always bring. So thank you. So we've got the C with compassion, and now agency.
Yeah. So agency, I really don't want to be throwing around buzzwords, and I did a lot of unpacking of this word for myself. I feel like I'm stepping into my own agency, and I'll share a little bit about some inspiration that I'm finding and where I find my sources of inspiration. But Peter Johnston, who wrote Choice Words a long time ago, still one of my favorites.
Me too.
It's really classic. It's timeless. It's small. It's mighty. Please read this book, and you'll feel a transformational shift with the language that you use with learners. But he describes agency as children having this sense that if they act strategically, there's intentional, deliberate, strategical approach, they have the ability to affect change and accomplish goals. And I'm seeing more and more and more feelings of powerlessness, learned helplessness, feeling like I'm seeing a lot of learners that seem passive, compliant, submissive, where maybe they're not even noticing there's a relationship between what they do and what happens. And they look defeated, some look depressed, some look disengaged. And I recently asked a student at a school that I work with, it was a third grade student, and I said, how do you know, or I said, what are you learning about? And he said, I just do what she tells me to do. And there was a list, and honestly, the teacher is amazing and has all these systems in place for independent learning. But it was just this sense of compliance, meh. And that's not agency. Agency really breaks down this traditional teacher power structure in the classroom, where teachers are shifting to more of a facilitator role and ensuring that learners use their voice, that they have choice, that they make their own choices, and that they see that their choices impact, affect change and help them reach their goals, and that kids feel in control of problem solving. An issue comes up, and then let's problem solve it together. Or even before a teacher says, funnels the information to a child, let them come up with some ideas. And then of course we shape and we facilitate. So kids with agency are more likely to choose challenging tasks. And if we're equity minded and culturally responsive teachers, we want kids leaning into challenge so that they can accelerate learning and plan and set goals and stick with something and work harder and have high interest and be focused. Agency is empowering, and it promotes independent thinkers. I am really hooked on Cleo Wade lately. She has a TED Talk from, I believe it was like 2017. And she's really inspired me to spark my own agency. This is what Cleo Wade said. She says, when the world asks us big questions that require big answers, we have two options. One, to feel so overwhelmed or unqualified that we do nothing. I have that in some areas of my life. Like, I really do. Two, we can start with one small act and qualify ourselves. So today, the mantra I'm using that I am inspired, that I learned from Cleo Wade is, today I'm going to do what I can with what I got, where I am, in my own way.
Can you repeat that?
Yes. So today I'm doing what I can with what I've got, where I am, in my own way. Even repeating that just helped me.
Yeah.
It's really powerful. So some ideas to try, maybe you try that mantra. Maybe you teach that mantra to kids. It's language that for sure is comprehensible to all ages. Some ideas to try, and you talk about this a lot in your 7 Essentials to Writing about normalizing struggle.
Mhm.
But learning from struggle, resisting the urge, resist the urge to tell students what to do when they're stuck. Let the awkward silence sit. Instead, ask an open-ended question like, so what will you do next? I really think that if we all start holding longer silence and open-ended questions, we'll be promoting this agency that is remarkably empowering. Encourage your learners to have choice with text. We've talked about this a lot. You've got to have that lean-in factor where you're holding a text that you want to read, that you're engaged, you care about.
Yes.
Let them write about topics that they care about.
Yes.
And then I'd just like to suggest to add student reflection so that your learners know what they're doing well, and they can even be a part of identifying next steps for themselves. So that's what I have to offer around agency.
Beautiful. I especially love that mantra. That is really, really helpful for any age. So how about R now, relevance?
Okay, so relevance, probably one of my favorite words. And it always feels kind of slippery, like how do you define relevance? It's so personal. And as I was doing my own, studying to prepare for this, I really see relevance is defined as knowing why something matters and how it's important, and realizing that knowledge can be useful, and that there's a perception from the learner that it's also interesting. We all have different perceptions of what's interesting, which is why I think teachers will be like, it's so relevant. This was relevant because, there was diverse representation in the text. So it's hard to find out what's interesting to our learners sometimes, but the kids know it's worth learning. It's not something they're compliant about. They're leaning in, there's curiosity. Relevance refers to learning experiences that relate to personal interests, cultural experiences. It's directly related to student engagement and motivation. And I almost chose engagement, but I realized that when things are relevant, engagement is a result of that interest and worth knowing. So we've all heard students say things like, I know you've heard it, this doesn't seem important. When will I ever use this? What does this have to do with my life?
Yeah,
I've said it too.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense coming right after agency too. So if you're thinking about relevance is also a pathway to agency.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us how do we do this?
So I think that educators should be able to answer those questions. If you hear a kid mumbling it under their breath, put it into your classroom meeting, pause, talk about why this might be important. Let them contribute an idea of what connection that they have. Let the kids make the real world connections. So we need inquiry charts all over the place. We need let's talk about it charts where they're putting Post-its up, where they get to say what they're curious about, something else that they want to learn about based on this topic.
Can you pause for a second? Tell me more about the let's talk about it chart. What does that look like?
I think it just looks like either a whiteboard with somebody writing, let's talk about it, and Post-it notes that are available to the kids, and they can draw or sketch what they want to learn about around a topic. So if you're learning about government and community and why people in a community work together, then find spaces to mine and harvest what your kids are wondering about. And then ask them, what are problems in our school, in our community, in our neighborhood related to this topic?
Yes.
An educator said, I love this saying, she said, give it context and make it count. And that's Sarah Bernard. And connect to what kids know, intentionally plan in time for kids to be able to reflect on how does this relate to their own lives in school, in community, and in the world, and give it context and make it count. So that's what I have on relevance. What do you think?
Nice. I just think it's also intertwined, and yet you're giving us practical ideas that will be mutually beneficial to all of it, right? if we build a compassionate classroom community, right, then we know that relevance is part of that. We know that relevance also contributes to agency. So all of this is just so intertwined, and yet all of your ideas also help us find different inroads to that. So now this big last one, equity. I mean, that's a biggie. Like we could
Yeah.
spend, decades talking about this, as we should. Let's just dig into that for just a
Yeah, by
moment.
no means do I want to minimize equity as just this little letter in the C.A.R.E approach. It's foundational. It's at the foundation of our spaces where we promote inclusion, belonging, making sure that every single kid, every day, every learner, everyone who walks into your space and intersects with you feels seen, feels heard, feels felt.
Yeah.
So the National Equity Project, I had this beautiful opportunity to be trained with them for a couple years. They define educational equity as each child receiving what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. And for every child to receive that, I'm drawing on Zaretta Hammond's work. So this is also a book that's been around, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And she's very generous with her knowledge and her tools and resources. And I'll be sharing this with you also. But what I've learned from Zaretta Hammond, in order to create a space that has equity at the heart, we need to have these distinctions of equity in mind. And I know this is impossible to read, but I know we'll make this available to any of the listeners and the viewers. So what she talks about is the importance of educators to discern the difference between multicultural education, social justice, culturally responsive teaching. And I'm adding one more, social emotional learning. So I believe it's really important for us to understand the reciprocity and the distinction. So when we talk about multicultural education, we're looking at a celebration of diversity. We see our own culture represented in our texts, in our conversations, in our spaces. We promote positive social interactions between others and across differences, and we also seek similarities. Social justice adds on and builds a lens for students to look at the world and see where injustice exists, what's fair, what's not fair, and why. And we can wrap words around social justice by developing the domains of identity, diversity, justice, and action. And that comes from the Learning for Justice, amazing source of support, and the social justice standards. So then we go deeper into culturally responsive teaching, which is what this book is about. And that's when we're building the capacity of each and every student, the learning capacity, the academic capacity. If our kids are represented in text and we do really beautiful multicultural fairs and they aren't good readers by 8th grade, then we're not serving them well.
Right.
So we have to push back on this dominant narrative about people of color and ask ourselves, are our diverse students, our language learners, students of color, immigrant students, multilingual learners, are they achieving underneath your wings? So that's building in really strong assessments. That's building in teaching students how to read, no matter their age. And then the other idea to take note of as educators is social emotional learning and the reciprocity and connection between self-awareness, social awareness, self-regulation, decision-making, relationship skills. I just feel like if I knew how to braid with 4 pieces, that's what it would look like for equity for me. So here's an idea to try.
Great.
So last thing, my offering to you is to select relevant texts. And for me, this text, Dreamers, is really important. I live about 20 miles north of, or 20 minutes north of Tijuana in Mexico and in San Diego. And there's a protocol that I use for all ages, all the time. And it comes from Rudine Sims Bishop. Check her out. Amazing, amazing human being. Definitely do a Google search on her. And what she's designed is something called mirrors, where we're having self-awareness. We look at how we see ourselves in texts. We look at who's represented, who's not. Mirrors implies that we're learning about other people's perspectives, going beyond ourselves, building more empathy and compassion. And sliding glass doors, she defines it as like stepping into an imaginary or real world. And I'm going to add on to her thinking and say, what are some actions you take? When you're walking through a door, you're putting one foot in front of the other, you're taking a step. And I'd love to have that step be, what Cleo Wade says, start with one small act. So what are some actions you might take? Based on what you learned in this text, what you learned about yourself, how will you become a part of the world that has been created? And so like in this text, it's, what if that new life led you to a new country where no one spoke your language? And here's a mother walking, she's with her baby, and there's just so many things that they don't know. They don't know the language. They're unable to understand. They're afraid to speak. They're afraid of making mistakes. If we linger on this page and ask, what's the mirror for you on this page?
Yeah.
I have a lot of self reflection about feeling, nervous about making mistakes, especially as a mother. And am I making the right choices? And did I go to the right place? And the book goes on to, they find a library and they find a lot of respite in their library. And that's where they both learn English. But we can build our compassion, our self-awareness, and just right next steps with that mirrors, windows, and doors.
That's beautiful. One quick question about that book. Who's the author?
The author is Yuhi Morales.
Wonderful. Thank you.
It's so beautiful. And I had a quote that I wanted to finish with.
Okay.
That serendipitously came into my life just 2 days ago. And Cleo Wade says, "We want to change the world, be brave enough to care." And so I just wanted to offer that out, especially with this CARE approach on compassion, agency, relevance, and equity.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for all of that brilliance. I feel like I want to rewind, watch this again, and unpack even more. There's so much heart in everything that you shared, which is exactly who you are as an educator and as a person, and also so much practicality. Definitely will be keeping this in mind, this CARE classroom, one full of compassion, agency, relevance, and equity. So
Thanks,
thank you,
Patty.
Liz. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
being with us.